Okay, we need to do that. I just want to say, Brian, a really great thanks from all of us for your role as vice president, particularly as director of membership. We've been expanding, and that means you've been doing a lot of work. Many of you know Brian's distinguished career in the Foreign Service that included his service as our ambassador to Latvia. Some of you may not realize that in addition to PDC and other organizations, he serves Pilots in Pause and pilots airplanes with animals that are rescued that need to find their forever homes or their forever homes. Anyway, Brian, with that note, I just want to thank you for all you do and for taking over this portion of the program. I'm turning the mic over to Brian.
Hey, thank you, Sherry. Let me just say a few things about Len Baldyga, who's going to speak next. I really do think of Len as the quintessential public diplomacy officer. He's, for me, as he is for many of you I know, a friend, a mentor, and a former boss. I first met Len when I was posted to Sofia, Bulgaria as a very junior public affairs officer. He was the deputy area director for Europe. And Mr. Baldyga, as I called him then, called me from Washington one evening, a rare event, let me tell you, in Bulgaria in those days, in a very stern voice to point out the error of my ways. Seems one of my routine telegrams reporting that the Bulgarians were willing to expand the Fulbright program had caught the attention of the NSC. That was the Reagan era, National Security Council. That's never a good thing when you're a junior officer, but it began a lifelong mentorship. At that point, Len was already very senior. He had already been the public affairs officer in both Warsaw and Mexico City. Soon after, he took over as the director for all European affairs at USIA. He earned the admiration of everyone in Washington for his ability to calm the irascible USIA director, Charles Z. Wick. Len steered Wick into productive directions and accomplishments such as global television and increased exchanges funding. Len was asked to come back again as USIA's director for Europe in 1992 because we needed to drive the agency in new directions to capitalize on the democratic revolutions wrought by the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of communist domination in Eastern Europe. Under Len's leadership, we did some amazing things in the 27 newly free Eastern countries that were ripe for democracy. Now, in saying this, I have not mentioned Len's experience negotiating America's culture and science agreements with the Soviet bloc countries. I've not spent time on his early career as an economic journalist and a financial writer. I passed over his role as an educator, such as when he directed the Edward R. Murrow Center at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. I've not touched on his work with NGOs, such as the Saber Foundation, the Polish Institute of Arts and Sciences, IREX, the National Polish American Council, the School of International Public Affairs at Columbia University. I skipped over all that because the important thing today is the close, supportive, and lifelong friendship between Len Baldyga and another public diplomacy icon, Tom Tuch. There is no better person to tell us about Tom Tuch's giant role in 20th century American diplomacy and his contribution to the Public Diplomacy Council than Len Baldyga. Len, over to you.
I thank you very much, Brian. Do you all hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes, you do? Okay, great. First met Tom more than 50 years ago at an East European PAO conference in Vienna, Austria in 1967. USIA director was present. I was the acting director of the Eastern European Special Projects Office, and I was just 5 years into being a USA officer, while Tom was already in his 18th year, having started as a cultural affairs officer in Wiesbaden, Germany in 1949. He was also present at the famous Nixon-Khrushchev kitchen debate in July 1959 in Moscow. It was at that PAO meeting that Tom told me that he was responsible for my being assigned as branch PAO to Poznan, Poland in 1963. I had come directly from Poznan to Vienna just a few months earlier. Tom said that he was assistant director for Soviet Union Eastern Europe when Edward R. Murrow was USIA's director. He said he and Murrow reviewing the staffing of the Soviet bloc posts, and a Polish-speaking officer was needed to replace Jerry Werner at Poznan. Tom said he told Murrow there was this guy, Baldyga, who spoke Polish, who was assigned to Dakar, Senegal. Tom said, just move him to Poznan. And so only 1 week after arriving in Dakar for my GOT assignment, I was told I was transferred to Poznan. It took a couple of months before I got a visa. Tom also told me that he had started taking Polish language lessons because he thought he was going to be PAO in Warsaw. He would have been my boss. But Tom never got to Warsaw. He was instead sent to Sofia, Bulgaria, as deputy chief of mission. Tom also told me that his family was originally from Posen or Poznan before they moved to Berlin, where he was born. That is why he had been looking forward to the Poland assignment. This was the beginning of our never-ending friendship. I saw Tom again in the 1968 Soviet bloc PO conference in Vienna. Tom was serving in Berlin and working with RIAS, Radio in the American Sector, broadcasting to the East Germans. This time, Frank Shakespeare was USA director. He and his Eminence Gries, Teddy Weintal, had arrived in Vienna after visiting Moscow, Warsaw, Bucharest, and Belgrade. There was a heated debate between Shakespeare and the PAOs whether capitalism or socialism would be the choice of the people in the Soviet bloc. Were they given their freedom? The PAOs opted for socialism. They were all fired. But Tom survived, and after Berlin, he was assigned to Brazil as Minister Consular for Public Affairs. I, in turn, after a brief tour at the agency, ended up as PAO in Warsaw. In 1975, my tour in Warsaw was ended. Jim Keogh, the USA director, called me and offered me the PAO-ship in Brazil. I accepted. I would be replacing Tom. However, all the PAOs in Latin America objected to my assignment at an LAO or LA area PAO conference, saying that once again, a guy from Eastern Europe was given the largest post in Latin America, and that they who had been arriving or serving in the area for years should be the ones considered for the posts. Tom, of course, Brazil after his tour in Sofia. The ambassador also questioned my assignment, but he was leaving. Years later, Tom told me that he also questioned a grade 2 officer as though he, Tom, was a minister consular. He also told me that he would put the assignment if I wanted it. But I turned it down. And so instead of replacing Tom, I was given the option of Mexico City.
I believe we might have lost the connection with Len Baldyga.
Am I back?
Marcy,
Yes, we hear you now.
I wonder if Len
Okay,
turns
good.
off his camera, if his audio will be better.
Okay.
Len, do you mind turning off your video to see if that makes a difference?
I just did it.
Okay, could you try unmuting yourself? Here we go. Let's see if this works.
Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I was given the option of Mexico City and took that, but there were some complaints about that assignment too. Tom went from Brazil to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy as the Edward R. Murrow Fellow, and from there to the Voice of America, where he's first deputy and then acting director of VOA. His next overseas posting was as PAO in Bonn from 1981 to 1985 during the Charlie era. I, in turn, became the European area director. I visited Bonn at least 3 times, once with Wick, and I was staying with Tom whenever I visited the post when not traveling with Charlie. Tom did an extraordinary job in helping create the U.S. Congress Bundestag.
I'll try calling Len.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you again.
Okay. Let me just start here.
You were in Bonn.
I was saying Tom did, okay, no. Well, I was saying Tom did an extraordinary job in helping create the U.S. Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange Program in the hand of President Reagan's 1982 visit to Berlin, Germany. And that youth exchange initiative demonstrated Tom's enthusiasm in dealing with young people. Monitor Clark, the young daughter of National Security Advisor William Clark, was assigned to Bonn and what later became known as USA's Pizzagate scandal. It was mostly centered around Defense Secretary Caspar Weinberger's son's work at US.
Huh.
Mr. Baldyga, are you there?
Can you hook him up on a telephone connection? Just an ordinary telephone, can stay off the video.
Yes, I would have to send him, let me try that. I will send him an email with a phone number to see if he can connect via phone.
Lynn? Lynn, do you want to keep reading through this? I can turn my speakerphone on.
Hello.
I don't know, Marcy, is that a bad workaround?
Hello, will that work?
Len, go ahead and continue your talk.
It causes a bit of an echo.
Len needs to sign out of the meeting.
Yeah, Len, would you be kind enough to sign out of the meeting and sign back in? I guess that's the best.
No, just
thing.
call in. Just
or call in by phone.
And
Marcy sent you a number to call.
And then Sherry has to hang up.
And I will hang up. Thank you. Thank you, Ann. Appreciate the technical prompts here. Very helpful. I know somebody is there with him trying to help. So the other option would be to go on and pull him in later. Let's wait 1 minute. I'm sure you all have things in front of you that Marcy, any sign?
So far, no sign.
It takes a minute or two to dial in.
Thanks, Joe. Okay. Amazing. I didn't know Tom had been involved founding the Congress Bundestag youth program that has had such good impact for decades. How many of you?
I had totally forgotten about the kitty gate.
Yes. No, fascinating. And actually, I was living in Brazil and got to meet Tom in Brasilia. That was the very first time I ever met him. I assume most people on the call knew him. Joe, is it Kitty, K-I-T-T-Y, or Kitty, K-I-D-D-I-E? Does someone know? Kitty Gate?
It's K-I-D-D-Y.
Thank you. All right, Joe, got your authoritative answer there.
They were the kids of prominent members of the cabinet. That's why they called it Kitty Gate.
Thank you, Bob.
And one short story until he comes back on that story.
Go ahead, Bob.
I was there in Bonn at that time. I got there a year after Monica Clark was there. But the first day I didn't know who she was. The second day I figured out who she was. And I marched into her office and I said, just for the record, I want you to know that I object to the way you got your job. But that will not affect our working relationship nor our friendship. And she did an excellent job with the Congress Bundestag program. She ran that at that time. She was there at the beginning of that program and ran it for 2 years. And she's always been a very, very good friend in spite of that disagreement.
Yeah. Marcy, any sign of Tom?
No sign of Tom. I sent him the email with instructions on how to enter the meeting via phone, including the meeting ID and passcode. So in the meantime, I think it would be nice to hear from others about the remembrances and if they have any stories of their own.
Brian, we'll go back to you then.
Okay, well, let me suggest that we'll turn to Alan Heil. And I would just briefly say, many of us know Alan. He's a fellow member of the PDC, a 36-year veteran of the Voice of America. He served as deputy director of VOA, and certainly one of the people who knew Tom extremely well. So, Alan, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Tom was a superb leader at VOA during the 79-day crisis when Iran held 52 Americans hostage in the mid-70s. Mr. Tuch, a newcomer to The Voice, is a senior USIA officer observing its activities, immediately understood its then new 1976 legal commitment to, quote, serve as a consistently reliable and authoritative source of news, accurate, objective, and comprehensive, That was the just passed Public Law 94-350. Senator Charles Percy, who was then chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, told Tom Tuch, if you let anyone inside or outside this government, in this country or abroad, interfere with the news broadcasts of the Voice of America, you are breaking the law. During the 70-day hostage crisis, not a single complaint by the foreign affairs community was lodged. A sharp and welcome relief after years of attempts by U.S. officials around the world to interfere with its now congressionally approved charter. I can even remember a case of one year when we had 90 complaints. And then in 1978, the number was 0. At any rate, that tells you a bit about Tom Tuch's influence as now a VOA sort of insider in the mid-70s.
Thank you, Alan. That was excellent. I see that Len is back with us. Maybe we could pick up where you were before, Len. We just heard from Alan Heil. Oops, I see Len muted for some reason.
I have asked him to unmute, so hopefully he will be able to do so.
Len, can you unmute?
We do miss the days of in-person meetings. We will be very happy to get back to at least hybrid soon. But thank you all for your patience. And Len, thank you so much for bearing with this technical craziness.
Here he is. Len, we could hear you now, I think.
I don't think we can still hear him.
No.
No, I don't either.
Given everything we have to accomplish today, maybe we need to move to our third and final speaker. And if we can integrate Len, we will.
Okay, well, let me introduce the man who needs no introduction here because he's the executive director of the Public Diplomacy Council, Bob Heath, an experienced foreign service officer, 27 years in 7 countries, 4 continents, and so forth. Bob and I go back a long ways. He was involved in press affairs and so forth. At the same time, I was the director of the press office at the State Department. But Bob is also the executive director of the Foreign Affairs Museum Council, a nonprofit dedicated to raising the money to design and build a museum and Center for American Diplomacy near in the State Department building. So Bob, let me turn it over to you.
Hello, I'm back.
Oh, go ahead, Len.
Len, go ahead. One of the things I think we'll do is I'm going to ask each of our speakers to kindly give me the text of their remarks, and we will print them in the next weekly update so that when we've missed bits and pieces, you'll see them in their entirety if they're willing. Len, go ahead.
Yeah, what I did is I went upstairs to my old desktop computer, and so I'm connected to that. Okay, well, let me pick up where I went. So, oh, Jesus. Do you hear me?
Yes, you're good. You're much clearer, and thank you for doing that, Len. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Just after the Congress Bundestag.
Okay, Tom made certain that Monica would be treated respectfully by the staff, and since she had some German, he found useful things for her to do at the post. He greatly appreciated what Tom did for her and Tom and she remained in contact and in a close friendship long after he retired. And so it seemed only natural that after retiring from Bonn in 1985, Tom joined the Board of Trustees of Youth for Understanding. When I returned to Washington in 1992, and once again was area director for Europe, I contacted Tom to resume our dialogue. I had been using his book, Communicating with the World, U.S. Public Diplomacy Overseas, while teaching at Fletcher. So I thought it would be useful to also seek his views on dealing with a European bureau that now involved more than 50 embassies, consulates, and other offices. Tom was never shy on providing advice on how to conduct public diplomacy. When I retired in 1994, Tom and Walter Roberts invited me to join their Romeo luncheon group that met every Tuesday at DiCarlo's restaurant on Yuma Street in DC. Romeo stands, of course, for retired old men eating out. I was honored to be included to a group that included Tom, Walter Roberts, Barry Zortian, John Reinhardt, Saul Schindler, Arthur Bowders, and Ed Alexander. By the way, Ed Alexander is now 101, and last year participated in a webinar panel on Turkish genocide of the Armenians. Romeo DiCarlo was an argumentative group, and Tom and Barry Z often disagreed on the meaning of public diplomacy. And when Barry one time suggested that the term should be totally discarded, Tom vigorously defending the term and suggested to Barry that he read his book. In 1994, Walter Roberts, Tom Tuch, and Abbott Washburn invited me and McKinney Russell to lunch and to tell us we were being invited to join the Public Diplomacy Foundation, now the PDC, of which they were the founding members. It was an exclusive PD club, and the only female member was Dorothy Robbins-Maury. Mac and I felt appropriately honored. But the fun part of my friendship with Tom involved his love and real passion for music. Tom had an encyclopedic knowledge of music. He could name the composer, the cast, the conductor, and the venue of every major opera written. And Tom kept the programs of every concert and opera he attended going back to his days as a young boy in Berlin. Tom donated this collection of some 3,000 programs of opera, theater, symphony, concerts, music recitals, going back to 1938 to the Wolf Trap Opera Company's Center for Education. The Yale University School of Music wanted Tom Tuch to become head of the school, saying his knowledge of music combined with his management skills was what they needed. Professors are not always good conductors or administrators. Tom turned down the job, saying that he did not play a musical instrument and said a musician should be running the school. My wife, Joyce, and I soon found ourselves trying to keep up with Tom and his wife, Mimi, and they were involved in so many cultural events in the DC and Baltimore areas, and that included ballet, orchestras, operas, and recitals. We would certainly have dinner together before a performance. We would generally have dinner before a performance, and we had season tickets to Roundhouse and Signature Theaters. But most of the time, we were together at various opera performances, the Washington Concert Opera, the Washington National Opera, the Met Opera auditions, and most of all, at the Wolf Trap Opera Company, which became a favorite of Tom and Mimi, and to which they contributed generously. Tom loved to mingle with the young singers, who were trying to make it at Wolf Trap. And they, in turn, were, of course, enthralled by his stories of the great operas he had seen and to hear his comments about famous singers and directors. After Mimi's passing in 2015, we were joined in these culture excursion by Sylvia Weiss, whose husband had just died. She lived in an apartment just down the hall from Tom, and became his constant friend and companion. She was by his side when he died. I particularly enjoyed dining and lunching with Tom because he would always order dessert, no matter the size of the main course. That gave me an excuse to also order dessert. Tom's favorite was palachinkin, usually smothered with globs of chocolate sauce. Tom would always try to get seats close to the stage at symphonies or operas where he would have a line of sight of the conductor. Tom would then discreetly mimic the conductor's movements, especially at operas. In the very last days of life, a large TV screen was set up in his bedroom where Tom could watch the streaming of Metropolitan operas all day long. His daughter has a video of Tom conducting from his bed. Tom was a prolific writer on all topics. He was a prolific letter writer, I meant to say, on all topics. And almost after every theater, orchestral, ballet, or opera he attended, he would write a letter to the critic after he had seen the review written about the performance. Sarah Kaufman, the Pulitzer Prize Washington, D.C. critic, wrote me when I informed her of Tom's passing. She said, Hans Tuch's love of arts was profound and inspired me. I treasure the many kind emails I received from him, along with the photos. I have always loved them and will cherish them even more now. I only wish I had met him in person, but his personality and his spirit came through in his notes. He wrote me of his tours with dancers, of some of the drama, and always what was clear was immense devotion to the arts and to making connection with people. I'm humbled to know he spoke of me, and how consoling to learn that he was watching ballets and opera and found him in some relief from his illness. I'm so grateful that you shared that. Corresponding with him was truly one of the pleasures of my life, unquote. And there is another side of Tom Tuch that needs to be told. Sherry Mueller recently wrote about the admiration she had for Foreign Service couples who managed to remain married for more than 60 years despite the rigors of diplomatic life. Tom and Mimi were one of those couples. They were married for 65 years when she died. She had suffered a stroke while they were attending a Santa Fe opera. When her health deteriorated further, Tom would help her get dressed in the morning, prepared her breakfast, and tried to keep her especially socially engaged. It was the devotion to be admired. And when his close colleagues, Henry Dunlap and Dan Humphrey, died, Tom made certain that their wives, Rosemary and Monique, got attention by invitation to luncheons, dinners, and to events. And friends knew that Tom and Mimi were unavailable each day between 1 and 3 p.m. Tom would disconnect the phones in their apartment so he and Mimi could take their afternoon nap. And Tom religiously got up each morning to take a 1-mile walk around the Maplewood apartment complex, rain or shine, and even when he was using a walker. Each Sunday, or after each Washington Redskins football game, Tom would call me to discuss the results with some passion. He would also be in contact with his son, David, who would be watching the game while living in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Tom's frustration with the former Redskins was alleviated by the Super Bowl victory of the Kansas City Chiefs in February 2020, his other hometown team. His frustration with the Redskins did not help when the Comcast TV in his apartment would broadcast the games only in Spanish. Let me close by saying that Tom Tuch thought public diplomacy officers had the greatest jobs in the Foreign Service. Besides dealing with presidents, vice presidents, and secretaries of state, which of course was an honorable thing to do, PD officers had the fun jobs interacting and dealing with the host country's intellectuals, writers, musicians, playwrights, and artists on a daily basis. And it was the PD officers who were responsible for handling the major artistic American groups, ballet companies, orchestras, individual artists, and of course, the greatest American jazz players and groups who visited their posts. Tom, of course, spelled all this out in his book, Arias, Caballetas, and Foreign Affairs, a public diplomat's quasi-musical memoir published in 2008. We all miss Tom's presence terribly, but I'm certain that if there is a choir of angels performing up in heaven, Tom is there conducting them. And thanks, Sherry, for giving me this opportunity to talk about my wonderful and cherished friend, Tom Tuch. Thank you.
Well done, Lynn. Well done.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I think it was Tom Tuch who told me at one of those PAO conferences in the 80s that the great thing about public diplomacy is that you get to deal with the best people in America and the best people in the other country. And he was certainly right about that. I should probably turn back to Bob Heath, who I briefly introduced before, because I know that he has a remembrance to mention as well. So Bob, can I turn it over to you?
Well, in summary, I came up with sort of 9 things that Tom was. He was a soldier. He was a storyteller, a diplomat, an academic, a linguist, an author, patron of the arts. He had a lot of humor, and he was very loved by friends. And I want to tell a couple of those stories just because, and many of you have heard these stories, and you might have heard a slightly different version, but anyway, I'll tell you the stories that I heard because they were fun. It showed the humor of this man. When he went into the military, he was 20 years old, and Second World War, and they were looking for paratroopers. And he said, well, that sounds like kind of fun, jumping out of airplanes with a parachute. So he says, I'll do it. And he signed up his buddy also, unknown to his buddy, who never thanked him for it. But anyway, never forgave him, I should say. But anyway, with very little training on the ground, very little jump training, he jumped in Normandy. 5 hours before the troops hit the beaches at Normandy, and they jumped behind enemy lines. And I asked him if he was seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, because he and his wife loved the movies also, as well as the arts. And he said, well, yeah, I saw the movie. I said, what did you think of it? He says, well, I didn't think much of the story, but the setting was very, very authentic. So if you want to see what he went, the hell that he went through 5 hours before Normandy, they hit the beaches of Normandy, see that movie. It was about the Rangers, which was in the next sector, but he was in the 101st Airborne. But he talked about when they landed, they didn't know where they were. They didn't know where their comrades were. They didn't know where the commanding officer was. And they had these little metal crickets. And if there was something moving in the bushes, they would click that cricket. And if they got a response of another cricket, that was an American. So they would join up. But if there's no response, they would use a machine gun and shoot everything in those bushes because it was not an American. But he survived, and he then went to Normandy. I mean, Battle of the Bulge. This was the second of 3 combat jumps. And he says one night they knew they were going to die the next day, and he had a couple other buddies had found a case of whiskey in the basement of one of the houses. And so they drank themselves blind because they knew they were going to die. But when the order came through from the Germans that they should surrender, and the American general said on the back of the surrender order was nuts. Well, how do you translate nuts into German? The translation, of course, is Nusse, which has no meaning whatsoever. So he translated as hell, go to hell. And he doesn't get much credit for that because his commanding officer apparently took credit for what Tom did. But Tom was the one that actually said, go to hell to the Germans, and they survived. And then he jumped in Holland. They were dropped into to hold one of the bridges. You've seen the movie Bridge Too Far. Well, that wasn't the bridge, but it was another bridge because there are many bridges there that they had to hold, and they were promised in 7 days they'd get reinforcements and they'd get food. Well, it was 70 days before they got it. They just had to live off the land. And Tom, being a short person, when he would jump in the foxhole, 3 guys would jump on top of him because he never was injured in all that combat. I guess just maybe he was too small, and but anyway, he had the aura that he was going to survive. So the other troops wanted to be with him. But he loved to tell the stories, and I always loved to hear those stories. He had a great sense of humor too. He was a little man, of course, as we all know, 5'1", and one of his predecessors in Bonn had been also very short. And Tom loved to tell the story of this predecessor who went away on a trip, and the FSNs, the Foreign Service Nationals, as we called them in those days, were given some orders of what they were supposed to do, and that the boss was coming back and they hadn't done it yet. So somebody said, well, what is the boss going to say when he comes back and find out that you haven't done that? And he says, well, he'll do what he always does, march up and down angrily underneath the desk. You know, Tom just loved to tell that little story, and then that was his. And Harry Rade was his deputy. Harry, I don't know, maybe somebody knows, he was either 6'6" or 6'8". I mean, he was a giant.
6'5", 6'6".
6'5", 6'6", okay. And so we put Tom on a chair, standing on a chair next to Harry, and Harry was still taller than Tom, even though he was standing on a chair. But that never stopped him, of course. And he had developed an incredibly close relationship with Arthur Burns, who was the ambassador those 3 years that Tom was in Bonn. And we all know Arthur Burns was a giant of the financial world, and but he was also short of stature. And he was also a German Jew. And these two people became extremely close friends. And when it came time for Tom to retire, Ambassador Burns invited 6 or 8 of us up to his office. We were all sitting around the table, and Arthur Burns was starting to talk about Tom. And he didn't get very far because he got all choked up. He was so emotional about his relationship with Tom. And so he turned to the DCM who was sitting to his left. Now you carry on. Impromptu, everybody around the table had to talk about Tom. But it was very easy to do because all of us had very close relationships with Tom and really appreciated him. You know, he was a linguist, one of the things. What did he speak about? 6 languages. He had at least studied 6 or 7 or 8. Well, I don't know what it was, but he gave a speech in French in one of the ceremonies in France, in addition to German and English.
And Russian.
And Russian, of course, in Russian. And of course, yeah, he translated for the vice president. That was.
He translated for Khrushchev too.
Yeah. So he had many attributes, and I always enjoyed the personal side of him. If I were in a meeting with him and I wanted to get his attention, I'd say, Hans Tuch, and his head would jerk around because everybody called him Tom. So it was a real privilege to work with him, even though for about 6 months in Bonn. And I think he retired from the Foreign Service. He couldn't take me more than 6 months, and he left.
Wow, thank you so much. Very helpful. And I would ask if Bob and Alan Heil and Len, if you all would be kind enough to, I'll remind you, but send your remarks, and anyone else in the council meeting or beyond, really, who would like to share their remarks, their reminiscences about Tom, we would be delighted to have them, and we'll pull them together in a nice small publication that I think will be a wonderful memento of really this historic meeting. Marcy, did you want to?
Yes, I would also be happy to share any photos. So Mr. Baldyga, the photo that you gave to me, I would be happy to send out along with the remarks.
Do you have it? Can you put it up very quickly, Marcy,
yes,
please? And then don't go away. We still have a little bit of business.
Yes, let me share this. This was the photo.
Oh, what a wonderful photo. We will include that. Marcy, thank you so much
Yes.
for
That's
reminding me about that. And here are some of the books that our speakers mentioned.
Yes. So I will be happy to share these photos and any other photos you would like.
Perfect. We'll integrate them into the publication. I would like to go on to, after an inspiring, I hope this next part will be inspiring as well. I think most of you are familiar with the fact that at the last board meeting, there was an approval of a motion offered by Ambassador Brian Carlson and seconded by Ambassador Greta Morris, which was passed unanimously by the PDC board on October 13th. The text of it is on your agenda. Because it is historic, I will repeat it here, even though I hope you have it in front of you. I move that the board approve the general thrust of the recommendations on governance structure contained in the Joint Oversight Group document dated September 30 and circulated to the board prior to the meeting, and that the board approve an expenditure to start the communication planning. It was $2870. I would ask that so we can have discussion of this. Is there a motion to ratify this recommendation of the board? Cynthia?
Having not been on any of the groups and so grateful for the people who've worked so hard to make this work, I would like to move the motion.
Thank you, Cynthia. Do I have a second? Mike McCary, a second. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? This really moves us. I've always talked about, at first we were holding hands with the Public Diplomacy Association of America, then we got engaged. This is like walking down the aisle. So just want to once again thank all of the people who've worked hard on this, Cynthia. I just really want to echo what you said, and I won't take up any more time. Any further discussion or commentary? Please raise your mechanical hand because I only see a bit.
Okay. Ellen's tribute.
Okay. If there is no discussion, all in favor say aye.
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 All right. Any noes? Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries. And as promised, this is historic. I thank you all. I trust most of you are, well, let me just say this. Are there any comments or questions that anyone would like to raise? We have about 5 more minutes before we need to stop to prepare for the first Monday forum. And as I said, I will be glad to schedule individual times, and I'm grateful to Joel for his willingness to do that as well, and for all of his leadership. Okay. All right. With that, are there any other personal remembrances of Tom that you would, we do have just a couple minutes that we could sneak in here? There was someone in the chat box suggested that, and I want to honor that in case someone has something that they would like to add. Please unmute yourself and speak up.
I just wanted to say quickly, I was in East Germany when Tom was the PAO in West Germany, a very, very young officer. And I got invited to a luncheon that Tom Tuch was at. And I was so excited. It was like having lunch with George Washington. And so I wanted to make it clear that I knew this very important person, though, of course, I didn't. And so I kept calling him Hans all during lunch. Hans this, Hans. And finally, somebody, not a very nice person, looked at me and said, "You know, he goes by Tom." And Tom looked at him and said, "I like Hans." And it was just the
fortunate to know him and have some stories about him. Are fortunate indeed, and I'm so pleased the rest of you have a better understanding of both his professional achievements, his dedication to the Public Diplomacy Council and to our field, but Tom as a man. I know that all of those, he's a multidimensional Renaissance kind of person. And I think our colleagues captured that well today. If there are no final thoughts, or
I just want to set the record straight. Tom was not 5'1" as his niece. I think he was at least 5'4".
Okay, sorry.
As my cousin Andy just said, but his personality was 7 feet tall.
Beautifully said. Is it Shari? Am I pronouncing it correctly?
It's actually pronounced Shari. It's Hungarian.
Shari.
Yeah.
Shari, thank you so much. That was a great.
I absolutely loved hearing these stories, and so did Andy. And we're so pleased that you allowed us to come to this. It was amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for being part of it and for being the support you were to your wonderful Hans Tom Tuch. On that note, we are officially adjourned, and I look forward to seeing you at the first Monday forum, which starts in 25 minutes.